First and foremost, I must mention that my mother and I are both Caucasian, but my stepfather is Latino, so my younger sister is half Caucasian, half Latino. Because of this, I learned Spanish growing up. When I was a young teenager, only about 12 or 13 or so, I can't remember exactly, my sister was 7 at the time. She was invited to a classmate's birthday party, and this classmate was also Latino. This will be important later. My parents asked that I walk her to the party and stay with her till it was over. The party was literally 4 doors down from our house, so it really wasn't that far, so I agree without much complaint. Besides, it was free cake. As my sister interacted with her classmates, I sat back near some of the older kids, minding my own business, when I heard a group of guys off to the side say my sister's name in Spanish. This caught my attention, as I didn't recognize them, and I started eavesdropping. This group of guys were probably in their mid-20s or so, and I found it odd that they knew my sister's name, and that I was even her sister, as we hadn't really been together for much of the party, and again, I didn't recognize them. They were, still in Spanish, talking about my hair, my skin color and such, and then one of them said, in Spanish,
"Man, I bet her pussy is great."
And the others laughed and nodded and pretty much thought it was funny. I grabbed my sister from the party and immediately left. As I passed the group of guys as we left through the back gate, I muttered, "You're disgusting," in Spanish as I passed them. And at first, they seemed surprised before the one who made the comment started leering at me. As soon as we got home, I told my stepfather what happened, and he took me back to the party and asked me to point them out. As I did, they spotted me and my stepfather, who is a very large and imposing man by the way, and they bolted. When we asked the host of the party if they knew who they were, no one seemed to know. Everyone just had assumed that they were friends with the eldest son, who was 20 at the time. But he admitted that he didn't know them. That's probably the creepiest part. Not only did they know who me and my sister were, but they showed up to a little girl's birthday party and no one noticed something was amiss or even knew who they were. Okay, so let me start off by saying that I'm a female college student. My school is known for being a big party school, but I'm not into that. I have never been, even in high school. I never saw the point in it all, but after my last party, I have even more reason not to be. It was my first semester of freshman year. I'm a chemistry major, and I met a lot of friends through various labs and lectures. There have also been a fair share of creeps. I'm not really used to being the center of anyone's attention, as I never have been before, and I really don't see a reason why I should be. I like having only a few friends and keeping my circle close. I liked being myself in the background, but still, new state, new rules, and there were creeps. Anyway, one such creep was named Tom. He was in my chemistry lecture, and from day one, he just seemed to fixate on me. At first, I would catch him staring at me when I looked over my shoulder at the clock. He always made sure he sat behind me. I would smile and politely turn back around, slightly creeped out, but nothing super bad. Then, after a couple of weeks, he got up the nerve to talk to me. I was raised to never be rude or just ignore people talking to me, so I played nice, even though I wasn't interested. I don't know why I was so against him at first. He seemed nice enough when he talked, but something in my gut told me it was off. Anyway, I started seeing him everywhere, even when I knew he was supposed to be in his class. I tried everything for him to get the hint. I tried avoiding him, moving seats in lectures, shutting down his attempted conversations. Unfortunately, I'm not a very confrontational person, and I couldn't find a way to just tell him to leave me alone. And he didn't seem to get the hint. My friends would always tease me that I had a secret admirer, and I would laugh along, but it unnerved me. He just started inserting himself into my life, and I didn't know what to do. One time after Thanksgiving break, I was studying outside at a picnic table, and lo and behold, Tom shows up. He just starts asking me how my break was, how my family was, and if I was happy to be back, and then he asked how Bruno and Riley were. Bruno and Riley are my dogs, and while I love to show them off, I knew for a fact that I have never talked about them with him or showed him any pictures. The rational part of my mind reminded me that Riley was the lock screen on my phone, so he could have at least seen her when I checked the time or something, and Bruno was my wallpaper, so he might have seen him at some point. But how did he know their names? When I asked him, he got nervous and tried to convince me that I had told him, but when I insisted that I didn't, he made some excuse and walked off. I should have done something then, maybe talk to security or something, but I didn't. I regret to say I didn't want to. I thought I could handle it myself. I have never been good at asking for help. So fast forward a little, Tom started to get more weird. He kept asking me for my number, asking me out, trying to get me to invite him back to my dorm. He got really aggressive. Eventually, I got to the point where my instinctual, well-learned manners went out the window, and I flat out told him, directly yet gently, as I'm not in the habit of hurting people's feelings, that I was not interested in having a relationship with him or anyone right now. He got angry and yelled at me for leading him on, calling me names like slut and bitch and whore, and then just stormed off. He started texting me nonstop, telling me how much he hated me and how I deserved to die. I still don't know how he got my number. I know what you're thinking. Now, she must have gone to the police or security or something, right? Nope. I was an idiot. I'm not a very confident person as it is, and some tiny part of me felt guilty, like I actually led him on. I didn't even tell anyone about the text. I just deleted them all, convinced myself that if I just ignored him long enough, he'd eventually give up and go away. I was a stupid, naive little 18-year-old, and I just let it happen. Okay, so fast forward about a month or so. It's near the end of the semester, close for us to head home for the winter break. My friend Anna had just broken up with her boyfriend, and she and my other friend Tori wanted to go drink to take her mind off things. Tori and Anna are both very petite girls, and naturally are incredible lightweights. They've been known to make some terrible choices after just a few beers. So they asked me to come with them to keep an eye on them. I agreed, and I brought my own water bottle with me so I wouldn't have to drink anything there. Even the water at these parties made me suspicious. The three of us went to the party, and while Tori and Anna went and got to drinking, I just sat on the couch in the corner and kept an eye on them, taking sips from my water. We'd been there for about 3 hours, and then someone sat down beside me. I look over, and you guessed it, there's Tom. He seems totally hammered already, and starts talking to me, telling me almost incoherently how sorry he is, how much he misses me, and how he overreacted, how he wishes he could take it all back, and asking if we could hang out later. I refused and told him to leave me alone, but still, he persisted. After another 10 minutes, I saw Anna across the room stumbling drunk, about to walk off with some guy. I got up from the couch after telling Tom, yet again, to leave me alone, and went over to Anna. I separated her from her new friend, who was clearly not as drunk as her and clearly wanted to take advantage of her. I got her and Tori back together and tried to tell them that we should leave, but they begged me to let them stay just a little bit longer, just so they could dance some more. And there's really no arguing with those two when they're drunk, so I just let them. I went back to the couch and Tom was gone. Please note that most of the rest of this story I only pieced together after the fact, as some of my memories are vague at best, and most are just missing altogether. I must have left my water bottle on the couch when I went to save Anna. After I took a few more drinks, I started to feel weird. I was super dizzy and shaky. So I decided it was time to go home. I grabbed Anna and Tori and we left, taking the bus back to the dorm, or at least we must have. When I woke up, I was in my bed, still in my clothes from the night before, and I had the worst headache. I couldn't remember anything at all after I started to feel weird. My roommate told me that I came home around 2 and stumbled into bed and passed out, mumbling something about not feeling well. She was surprised, as she knew that I didn't drink, but just figured that I decided to let go a little and had a little too much. I started to realize what happened. Tom must have drugged my water. I felt sick. I knew Tom was a weirdo, but I never thought he would be quite so driven. It sent shivers down my spine to think about what he planned to do. As if to confirm my suspicions, when I checked my phone, I saw I had a new text from Tom. It said,
"Why did you leave so early last night? I had such a night planned for you."
I didn't go out much after that, not just to parties, but to class either. I told my friends and professors that I was sick and got the last week's notes from them. After the finals and break, I came back and found out that while Tom was stalking me, he was neglecting his classes, and as a result, he had flunked out. I haven't seen him since, but still, I haven't gone to a party since then. So Tom, you're one sick bastard. Let's never meet again. Since numerous people have asked, yes, I did eventually go to the police. I waited a little while just to make sure he wasn't on campus anymore. At my school, once you finish your last final, you have to be gone within 24 hours. And I didn't want to keep looking over my shoulder while trying to pass my classes. I'm not sure what, if anything, came of it, and I'm fairly certain that I didn't give them enough to go on, but it's a footnote somewhere. I'm a 27-year-old female from West Virginia. This story happened to me when I was about 7 years old. To start off, I have 2 siblings, an older brother and a younger sister. My brother is a year older than me, and my sister is a year younger. I'm the middle child. When I was about 4 or 5 years old, my parents got a divorce, and my mom pretty much raised us after that. Anyway, eventually my mother moved on and got a new boyfriend. This boyfriend actually ended up becoming very physically, verbally, and emotionally abusive towards our mother. He would hit her right in front of us, scaring us half to death, and would frequently call her names. I remember one night when I was about 6. I was cleaning my room while my sister and brother were watching TV. We heard them fighting on the porch, and we looked out the window and saw him strangling our mother, holding her by the throat against the front door. It was traumatizing to say the least. Another time, he started a fight with our mom because when we kids were eating a bag of chips, we were crunching too loud with our mouths. I think I was about 6 at this time. Another was when we went into the McDonald's drive-thru and he started a scene right in front of the workers and was yelling at my mom and the worker. I remember that it was extremely embarrassing. Yet again, another time when I was walking into my mom's room to talk to her, thinking that she was in there, and he screamed,
"Don't come in."
There was a hallway before my mom's room where you can't see into the room unless you walk down the hallway and turn left. Well, I was halfway down the hallway and turned left where I could see, but not actually be in the room. I thought he meant exactly what he said, "Don't come in," by not to walk in the room because maybe they were doing something with the floor. I don't know. I was 6 at the time. When I stood there scared, he yelled,
"Get out! Are you stupid?"
He had just got out of the shower and didn't have a towel, so he was covering himself with a shower curtain. I hurried back to my room in tears, and I believe that there was a fight that night as well, meaning that we would have to go to bed early again. Our whole family knew about how abusive he was to my mom. I assumed that she was just depressed and had a low self-esteem because of all the abuse. She would keep taking him back. My grandparents, who lived next door, absolutely refused to accept their relationship because of his abuse towards my mom and made it clear that he was never to return to the house again. Well, my mom eventually started sneaking him into the house and covering all the windows with dark sheets. I remember it was always dark in the house, and we could never have people over. My mom didn't want to be involved in family events, and I just remember this as a very dark time. He was obviously doing his best to keep her from the rest of the family, as most, if not all, abusers do to their victims. When my grandparents found out that he would be there, they would freak out and call the police to come over and pound on the door to get him out of there. We were sworn never to tell anyone, especially our grandparents, that he was there. One time my sister told my grandma that he was there, probably because my grandma got it out of her somehow, or she was scared and felt she needed to tell her. Anyway, I told my mom that she told because I saw my grandma coming over with a baseball bat and I was afraid that she would get hurt, so my mom, her boyfriend, and all of us kids piled in the car quickly and took off in the car before she could make it over to the house. I felt bad because I got my sister in trouble, but I also knew that I didn't want my grandma to get hurt. Lastly, I remember the state coming to our school at least 3 times and asking to talk with us kids individually about the abuse, and our mom warned us never to tell them anything about any abuse taking place in the house because she said that they would take us away from her and go to a foster home or something. We were all very scared and was always instructed to lie to them, saying that there was nothing going on, which we did, because we were scared of being taken away from our mom. Eventually, our mother got away from this creep, even though he pretty much stalked her for years before she could completely get away. We were all very relieved to be away from him. The main incident I want to tell you, though, was after she broke away from him for the first time. The time that I'm referring to is a few weeks after she kicked him out. My mother's sister and brother all went to the grocery store this day to fill up the fridge. We all had a great day and got lots of yummy food and snacks. We all were carrying groceries into the house. I remember feeling so happy that we didn't have to live on pins and needles anymore, and that we could all just be happy. When I walked into the house, I went straight to my mother's room. As I walked into her room, I heard a noise and saw the shower curtain move. I was positive that someone was in there. I ran out to my mom, who was in the kitchen putting the stuff away, and looked her straight in the eyes and said, "Mom, I think there's someone in your room." At first she said that I probably just saw something, but after I looked at her with the most serious face I could conjure and said, "Mom, seriously, I saw them behind your shower curtain. Someone is in your room for real." Her face became pale white as she realized that I was being dead honest, and that there was a real chance that someone was actually in her room. Before she could even respond, a figure popped out of the hallway and yelled, standing there wide-eyed and creepy looking as fuck. He had the biggest, most sinister grin on his face, and my mom was in pure shock. This weirdo broke into our small trailer while we were out grocery shopping and was hiding in my mom's shower for when she got home. What the hell? It was basically terrifying. And I think another fight started up that night because she wanted him to leave. I don't know why the cops were never called, but when I grew up, I remember my mom telling me that he used to be friends with all the cops in town. The creepiest part is that I remember at some point hearing that he was suspected of the murder of some guy because he was apparently the last person to see him before he drowned it in a river. That makes him even more terrifying. After they eventually broke up for good, years later my mom remarried to a man that has never laid a hand on her. I think she heard from him on and off over the years here and there, but I'm assuming that he has moved on to terrorizing some other family because we thankfully have been able to live in peace from that psychopath all the way up to now. If I could give some advice for a child who is going through a similar situation, my advice would be to tell someone, even though your parent or guardian forbids you not to, or you fear that you will be in trouble or be taken away from your family. You need to tell your school officials or some other family members, or even the police, because what is happening is not right, and your parent or guardian who is being abused is being brainwashed by the abuser, and they will snap out of it once you do the right thing and take some action. They will eventually realize that what is happening is wrong. Please just tell someone, and don't waste years of your life being miserable like we did. The National Domestic Abuse Hotline is 1-800-799-7233. And to the creeper who stole years of my family's life, let's never meet. And for the love of all that is holy, go see a fucking therapist. This is a story that my friend told me. This happened to her older sister. She goes to a large private religious university in Utah. She was staying at an apartment not too far away from campus with 3 other girls. The semester had just started, and 2 of the 3 girls were asleep. My friend's sister was on her phone, sitting in the living room, when she heard what sounded like footsteps outside the window behind her. She listened closely, but dismissed it as just some stray cat or dog. Soon after, she heard a thud against the dining room wall coming from the outside, and heard what sounded like muffled whispering. My friend's sister is an excellent marksman, so she decided that she would scare off whoever was outside by opening the blinds, turning on the lights, grabbing the shotgun that she kept on the mantle, and pointing it out the window while screaming for the other girls to wake up. She saw a short man wearing all black and a ski mask running away. The cops came shortly after, and she filed a report. Fast forward a few weeks later, and my friend's sister keeps seeing a small white truck with tinted windows following her. She dismisses it as her imagination, but it still freaks her out a little. One weekend, her roommates have gone out of town, so it's just her by herself. Right as she's about to fall asleep, she hears a pounding at her door. She bolts to the door and looks through the peephole to see a cop standing there. "Who are you?" she asks.
I'm a cop.
Says the guy.
Open up. It's the law.
He yells menacingly. My friend is starting to call bullshit, but she's scared of disobeying him if he actually is a cop. "Why are you here so late?" she asks.
Remember a few weeks ago when that guy tried to break into your house? I have an update on him.
My friend is freaking out now, because why would a cop try to talk to her about the case so late and by himself? He wasn't even the officer who helped her fill out the report. "Show me your badge," she demanded. He pulled it out and shoved it into the peephole. She sighed with a breath of relief. Right as she was unlocking the door, she glanced down at his legs and noticed that this cop had very elevated platform boots and a machete in his utility belt, and the name on his uniform didn't match the name on his badge. "You're not a fucking cop," she yelled at him. The fake cop screamed and started slamming on the door, saying,
"I'm an officer of the law, and you will obey me. Open up."
She called 911 and held her weight behind the front door, clutching her shotgun until the real cops arrived. The guy was long gone by then, but he left behind his cap, which was a prop from a party store. The day after this, my friend broke her lease and moved to a new city in Utah, transferred schools, and bought a Doberman to keep her company. This didn't happen to me, but to my mom about 4 years ago. I was about 12 at the time and was at a 3-day-long field trip with my school and had left on Wednesday and would be back on Friday. When I came home, my mom and brother told me this story. My mom, my brother, and sister were all driving back from my brother's wrestling practice that was from 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. It was about 30 minutes away from my house, so it was not that long of a drive. About 10 minutes into the drive, my mom noticed that she was being followed by a gray car. I don't remember what the car was, but she had an eerie feeling, but pushed it off as it was a busy street and it wasn't really anything scary. It followed her until she got off the road and onto a more quiet street, and the car was still following her. At this point, she started to feel a little weird, but she did not say anything to freak out my little brother, who was 10, and my little sister, who was 8. So she kept quiet and kept looking out her rearview mirror. It had followed them until she got onto our road, and our road did not have any street lamps except for the one at the end. So this meant that our street was very dark. So she pulled into our driveway, and to my mom's horror, the car had stopped in front of our house. My mom is a very strong woman, so she got out and told my brother and sister to stay in the car. A skinny white man stepped out of the car and told my mom that he was the police and that he would need to take her to the station to ask her some questions about her reckless driving. My mom is a very safe driver, and she never drinks or smokes, and she knows that she wasn't driving recklessly. She told him that she didn't recall any of that and would like to see proof that he was a cop. But he just kept persisting that she come with him, and then said,
"Bring your children as well."
At this moment, she knew this man was not a cop, because she never told him that she had any children. She kept refusing to go and told him to leave. The man suddenly started walking towards my mom. She was startled at this sudden movement and was frozen in fear as he came closer. Suddenly, the front door opened to my house and my dad stepped out. The man froze in his tracks and squinted at my dad. My dad is a big guy. He used to be a wrestler and also boxed. The man made eye contact with my dad and started to walk back to his car. Then he said to my mom,
"I will let you off with a warning."
He got into his car and drove away. My mom quickly rushed my brother and sister into the house and locked the door. She hugged them and cried. My dad told them that he had a strange gut feeling and felt like something made him go outside. They believed that it was a guardian angel. When she told me this story, the one thing that bothered me the most was that he had known that she had kids and that we drive home from practice every day of the week. This could only mean that he was stalking us and knew our daily routine. But it doesn't end there. About 2 weeks later, me and my brother are getting dropped off at our bus stop to go home. We're the only two kids to get off at our stop, and the walk home is about a 3-minute walk. As we're about to get off the bus, my brother freezes and grabs me by the shoulder and points out a window to a gray car and whispers in my ear, "That's the guy that followed us." I stared and a chill ran down my spine. The man was sitting in the car looking at the bus. I turned to the bus driver and explained the situation. He then told us to go sit down in the seat right behind him. He then drove us directly to our house and dropped us off. Our dad was home and we came running to him and told him that the man was back. As we said this, he told us that maybe it was just a coincidence. But then he looked up and his eyes grew wide. I turned around to see the car slowly coming down our road. But as it came in view to my house, the man looked at my dad and sped away quickly. From that day forward, my dad picked us up and dropped us off to school every day, and we never saw the car or the man ever again. So this happened to my aunt and uncle in the early 80s. They were living in Austin, Texas, and had attended a party in a neighboring area. They were driving back very late, and at one point they were driving on a very long, completely deserted stretch of road bordered by woods and brush on either side. No houses, no streetlights, no other cars on the road, nothing. Until my uncle, who is driving, notices a car coming up behind them, which then speeds up and gets very close. My aunt and uncle start talking about how weird this guy is. They can see it's just one man driving, and there's no reason to tailgate on an empty road in the middle of the night. Then the guy speeds up even more and pulls up alongside them. He starts yelling at them to pull over and is flashing what looks like a police badge. My uncle starts to slow down to pull over, and my aunt absolutely freaks out and tells him not to. She's really creeped out by this guy who is driving a car that has no police markings and no flashing lights, and pulled up to them out of nowhere and is now trying to get them to pull over just by flashing a badge. While they argue about whether or not to pull over, the man in the other car is getting more angry, yelling at them to pull over, beeping his horn and flashing the badge, saying that he's the police. My aunt starts crying, but my uncle says fine, if he really was a cop and they need to stop for him, they will do so in the next populated area, which will be a while. But they reasoned that if he really was a cop, he would have to understand their point of view. My aunt and uncle keep wavering between worried this guy is out of his mind and worried it's a real cop and we're going to get in big trouble for not pulling over when told. Finally, they see a gas station up ahead and plan to stop there. As soon as they pull into the gas station, the cop speeds off, never to be seen by them again. They didn't think to try to get his license plate number at the time and were just thoroughly creeped out. They drove the rest of the way home without incident. But the story does not end there. A few months later, on the exact same stretch of road, a man is rescued who tells a horrifying story, which is then big news in Austin. A fake cop, flashing a badge and beeping his horn, had gotten this man, who was driving at night with his girlfriend, on that very same road to pull over. Once pulled over, the fake cop forced the man and his girlfriend to get out of the car. By gunpoint maybe, I'm not sure on all the details at this point. My aunt refused to read too much about the story back then because she was so freaked out, and my uncle doesn't remember everything in detail. The man and his girlfriend were taken into the woods on the side of the road. He ties the man and his girlfriend to separate trees, facing each other, and does horrible things to both, ultimately killing the woman while the other was forced to watch just a few feet away. I'm not sure how the man ended up being rescued, but it was long after the fake cop was gone. Either someone must have found the man tied there, or he finally got loose and found help. They never caught the fake cop murderer. That could have been my aunt and uncle if they had pulled over their car that night, like my uncle wanted and started to do. My aunt always ends the story with, "And that's why my husband always has to listen to me." I have this close friend named Jack, who relayed to me a pretty terrifying tale of something that happened to his friend a long time ago. My mentor Jack is now a retired former HR community college guy in his mid-60s. 30 years ago, however, Jack was working as a bartender in Portland's gay community. That's how Jack met Randy. Randy was a good-looking, well-spoken customer in his mid-20s, a pretty attractive 1980s preppy type. Randy lived close to Jack, and the two went on a couple of dates for a few weeks. Randy was relatively new to Portland, having moved there a few years ago after his parents in small-town Connecticut flipped out about him being gay and tried to commit him to an institution. They were dating casually, but Jack was shocked when he discovered that this clean-shaven college graduate was working the streets of Portland as a hustler. You see, we think of Portland as being this hipster haven now, but back in the 1980s, there were a lot of seedy elements to the town that included the gay underground prostitution scene. The revelation about Randy's career happened this way. Randy called Jack one night and asked him if he could come over. He showed up at Jack's apartment pretty upset. Randy confessed to Jack that he was a prostitute and relayed a wild tale about something that happened to him the night before with a client. He refused to name who it was, but told Jack it was a very prominent local businessman, someone who was very high profile in mid-1980s Portland. The client was into S&M bondage stuff, and Randy saw him about once a month for a year. The previous night, after they concluded their scene, the client said to Randy,
"I had a fantasy. I kidnapped you and kept you forever."
He asked Randy if he wanted to stay with him. Of course, Randy said, "No way," and the guy got angry. The chauffeur drove Randy home, which in hindsight was a huge mistake. The client now knew where he lived. Earlier that evening, Randy was heading home, but before he got to his apartment, Randy noticed that his client's limo was parked down the street from his building. Randy noped the fuck out of there and ate dinner elsewhere. But when he went home, the limo was still there with the chauffeur sitting in the car. That's when he decided to go over to Jack's place and confess everything. Randy was completely terrified now. He tried to laugh it off as some dumb joke, but the fact that the chauffeur spent hours parked in the same spot a few blocks from his apartment building was scary as hell. Randy begged if he could stay at Jack's place for a few days, so this could die down. Even though Jack was totally surprised and pretty confused about all this, he let him stay at his place until a few days later, Randy called him at work and told Jack that he had decided to go back to his apartment. Randy said that he would call Jack later in the week about a movie they were planning on seeing that weekend. When Jack went to his apartment building a few days later to check on Randy, the building manager said that Randy had moved out. After that, there wasn't much Jack could do. Randy did not tell him who the guy was, and he didn't know much about Randy's background except for some vague idea from where he was from. And this was, again, the 1980s. Policemen were not going to make a big deal about some male prostitute that went missing. Jack kept hoping that he would get a call from Randy, but as days turned into weeks, weeks turned into years, and years turned into a quarter century, he stopped expecting that call. Hopefully Randy just skipped town. Maybe he ran all the way back to Connecticut, found some sympathetic family member who helped him get on his feet, and he put all this behind him. And he's just some regular 50-something-year-old guy now, with a regular career and regular concerns. Or maybe not. And Jack will never know. I used to work at a security company with a bunch of friends. We all got along well, and most of us even hung out after work. The ones I didn't hang out with kept to themselves. They were two brothers that worked nights with me, and they were in their own group. They were new to the company and would have many conversations about their guns. Bill was the older brother, and Luke was the younger. After hearing Luke and Bill talk about target shooting so much, I developed an interest. I don't own a single firearm, but my roommate owns several. I mentioned at work one night that I was going shooting in the morning with my roommate, and I needed a good place to go to. Well, the two brothers pointed out a spot on Google Earth for me and said it was great, and they have gone shooting up there once before. It was about 45 minutes away and was higher up in the mountains. I knew the spot precisely due to a single image posted to the coordinates on Google Earth, with used shotgun shells covering the ground. I decided that it was as good a spot as any, and told my roommate Don where to drive us. We arrived the next morning at 10 a.m. and parked at the top of the hill. We saw our spot about 150 yards away in a clearing down in the valley and began hiking down. A quick side note, I wore this bright neon yellow hooded sweatshirt at work, and during the winter, I'm also a pretty large fella. Being big and brightly colored makes you very visible from far away. I've seen hunters using bright colors to avoid accidentally getting shot by other hunters. I decided to wear my trademark bright hoodie on our little hike. We made it a quarter way down the hill, and I see a group of fellow target shooters at our desired spot. These were the only other people we had seen in 30 minutes. Our spot is taken. Lame, I said. The second I said lame, that's when shit hit the fan. We were on the side of the mountain walking down towards them, and the rounds started flying. This group was shooting at us. Don and I were targets for about 3 guns, and we didn't have immediate cover. I see Don running across the mountain, strafing the shooters. I see what he is running for. It was a small plateau about 20 yards next to us. The sounds of bullets flying inches away from my ears is a sound that I will never forget. Movies do not do the sound justice at all. Not even close. I still get chills thinking about it now. The vibration and the rotation of the bullets chilled my bones. It's not a sound I would want to hear again. It made everything go slow-mo and very clear. My adrenaline was kicking in. We made it to cover and hit the dirt. We were pinned down, but at least we had cover now. I had to have heard at least 100 rounds pass just over the lip of the plateau. I heard a pistol, a rifle, and a shotgun. I know I did. The trees, boulders, and mountainside were being hammered by round after round. If we had sat up from our cover, we would have been shot in the face. These people were shooting up a hill, towards a road. They had their backs to their paper targets. Thinking back on it, my father said I should have yelled down to them and let them know they were shooting at 2 people and to hold their fire. But the thing is, I think they knew they were shooting at us. How could they not? We weren't that far, and the mountainside was almost bare. I didn't want to let them know they were close to hitting us. I should have shot back. We had the high ground, but I'm not a killer. We just waited and listened for their footsteps and wanted them to stay where they were. If we were killed, no one would have found our bodies out there. 15 minutes went by, and the gunfire didn't let up. until it just ended. The mountain was quiet again. After about 5 more minutes of silence, we checked down the hill. They were gone. We had our guns ready as we scanned the valley down below. Nothing more. No more guys, no vehicle, just their garbage left behind. We decided it was a great time to get the hell out of the hills. We made it back to our car and back to our house faster than ever. When I went back to work the next shift, I told this story to everyone. I even thanked Bill for the sweet advice. He apologized for the bad locals and said, "That's crazy." Another coworker told me that Bill and Luke went shooting that same morning in the same area. I asked Bill immediately about it. I asked him where he went shooting and what guns he brought with him to shoot. He pointed at the same damned Google Earth image as before. Luke, his friend, and Bill were using a Glock, a .22 rifle, and a 12-gauge shotgun. It was all coming together so quickly, I told him that he was a psycho and almost killed us. He denied shooting at us, even changed his mind about where they went shooting. He said it was actually 2 miles west because his GPS was inaccurate. I knew that he was lying, but what could I do? I had no proof. He worked with me for another 2 years before I moved away and never heard from them again. I remember how emotionless he was when he denied shooting at me. He was like a robot. We never spoke of it after that first time, and I haven't gone shooting since. To give a little bit of background information, this started in the winter of 2012. I was 23 years old at the time and living with my dad. My mom and my brother were living in another house about 10 minutes away from us. One morning, I woke up at around 8 a.m. because I had an early doctor's appointment. I went outside to see a note pinned to the windshield wiper of our car. The note said, "I'm going to kill you, fucking pedophile scum." I kinda just laughed it off. I assumed the note was for my dad, who had a habit of complaining to parents in our neighborhood about their children's shitty behavior. There were these twin boys who liked to try and catch and torture squirrels. He often marched them home by their ears to complain about them to their parents. I thought one of the parents was just being a douchebag, so my dad and I didn't bother with it too much. Later in the day, while talking to my mom on the phone, I mentioned the note to her offhandedly in a very casual way, and I was shocked by her response. She responded by very emphatically warning me several times to make sure all of my windows and doors were locked, and to bring a weapon to bed with me at night. I was a bit taken aback because she had never said anything to me like that before. She had never even given me the good touch bad touch talk. She reminded me at least 12 times over the course of the conversation to bring a knife or a baseball bat with me to bed, and to lock my bedroom door at night. I thought she was just overreacting, so I waved her off. Then other weird things started happening. We started getting random packages and deliveries sent to our house. Bibles and Qurans, newspapers, porn flyers and pizzas, and moving trucks that we hadn't ordered. The first few times it happened, we thought it was a mistake, but it kept happening. I came to the conclusion that somebody must be pulling a prank on us. We didn't know who it was, so there was nothing that we could do about it but apologize profusely to yet another confused pizza delivery man. In September of that year, I started taking a night school class with my best friend. The course went from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. every Monday and Wednesday night, and after the class, his mom would come pick us up and drive us home. Sometime in November, his mom dropped me off from school, and I went inside and chilled out on the couch for a couple of hours. I like to wind down a little bit before I go to bed, or I can't sleep. I ended up falling asleep on the couch. Something woke me up abruptly at about 4 o'clock in the morning. I heard the unmistakable sound of a car tire being slashed, and it sounded like our car. What the hell was going on? We didn't have any enemies. In retrospect, this was probably a stupid thing to do, especially considering that I'm a relatively small female. I'm only 5'5" and was 23 at the time. But I grabbed a generic kitchen knife and went outside to check it out. When I got outside, I discovered immediately that I was correct. There was a man in our driveway slashing our tires. Unwisely, I immediately yelled, "Hey, you!" and he turned around to face me. That's when I noticed that he was slashing our tires with an enormous hunting knife, at least 6 inches long. He looked surprised, but then defiant, and began to advance towards me with the knife slightly raised. I just froze. I didn't know what to do. He was coming at me so fast, I couldn't even think. Thankfully, at that exact second, my across-the-street neighbor, who had also heard him slashing our tires, turned his porch light on and yelled out the window, "Hey, I'm calling the police." The man yelled back,
"I don't give a fuck. Call them."
But he quickly retreated back to his car, where I could see a middle-aged woman with long brown hair waiting for him in the passenger seat. Our eyes locked, and I knew instantly we had met before. I couldn't quite put my finger on when or where. I just knew in my gut that I've met this woman before. They sped off into the night, and we called the cops, who said they couldn't do anything for us because they didn't know who had done it. I mean, isn't that kind of your job, though, to find out who did? I called my mom and told her what happened and asked her if she had any idea who had done this to us. She immediately said no, but there was something in her voice. I could just tell that she wasn't being honest. A few weeks later, I decided to go to my mom's house and spend a day or two there, determined to get some answers. As soon as I walked in the front door, I knew something was wrong. The second she saw me, she just started bawling her eyes out. She took me by the hand and sat me on the couch and explained the whole story to me, start to finish. It's necessary for me to give a bit of background information here. My mother is a businesswoman by trade. She was still in sales at the time, but she is also a bit of a hippy-dippy. It's retrograding, so I don't get into any arguments with this weak type of person. On the side of her regular day job, she was selling Arbani makeup, which is a all-natural brand of makeup that is free of parabens, oils, sulfates, and other common cosmetic additives. A couple of months before this all started, she ended up being referred a new client named Andrea by her weed dealer. Yes, my mom smokes weed. This is Canada. Everyone smokes here. Andrea was the dealer's girlfriend, and she was interested in buying Arbani. So my mom invited her over to her apartment to look at some makeup samples. They started chatting about a variety of topics, as women do, and my mom let it slip that her last name was Hayes. As my mom told me, Andrea paused for a few seconds, looked at her and said, "Hayes, did you used to be married to a man named Darren Hayes?" My mom answered that yes, Darren Hayes, my father, was her ex-husband. And then shockingly, this Andrea woman actually bursted into tears, threw my arms around my mom in a hug, and began to tell her a story about all the disgusting things that my dad had done to her. Apparently, when she was 14 years old, she's now in her mid-30s, I would have been 4 years old at the time, and this would have happened around 1994, she had been dating a man named Andrew, who had been living with my dad at the time after my parents divorced. According to Andrea, this man, her new boyfriend Andrew, Andrew's twin brother Daniel, and my father had taken turns beating her, raping her, and forcing her to prostitute herself in order to make money off her. Eventually, they ended up selling her to child prostitution, from which she said she had never recovered. At this point, I realized that this is where I recognized her from. My dad had been roommates with her boyfriend Andrew, and I used to see all three of them when I went over to visit him every second weekend. She sobbed inconsolably during the whole retelling of this story, telling my mother how after this traumatic experience, she had turned to drugs and alcohol to numb the pain of her abuse, and she had been addicted to crack and alcohol off and on ever since because of what my father had done to her. My mom was shocked. She didn't know what to do. On one hand, she knew my father to be a generous, soft-spoken and kind person who never lifted a finger to her or to any person, and who rarely raised his voice. But on the other hand, it seemed odd that Andrea would just happen to remember his name all these years later if she had been lying. She didn't know who to believe. After several hours of crying and much consoling on my mother's part, Andrea finally left. And that's when the stalking began. A few days after this encounter, my mom came home from work to find Andrea's boyfriend sitting on the couch, waiting for her. He immediately told her that he was planning on killing my dad, and that my dad deserved to die because he was a pedophile, rapist piece of shit. And that if my mom told anybody at all, especially the cops, he would be sure to kill me as well. He then concluded his threat by describing the layout of our living room and exactly what outfit I was wearing that day. From then on, he or Andrea would text or call her several times a day to threaten and taunt her, telling her that they were going to call the cops on my dad and have him thrown in prison. They were going to have him killed, and if she told anybody, they would hire someone to rape and murder me. Naturally, my mother was absolutely terrified. She was from an upper middle class family who immigrated to Canada from Germany. She had never dealt with this type of person before. She stopped eating, she couldn't sleep, and she even stopped going to work. She lost 30 pounds and her hair started to fall out from stress. She started having panic attacks because she didn't know what to do. Later she told me she understood how I felt now because I have an anxiety disorder that causes me to have panic attacks. Eventually, after the night I almost got stabbed, she decided that she had to call the cops. She couldn't take the chance that they would hurt me. She had to do something about it. And what she found out was shocking. Andrea was well known to the police. When my mom told them this story, she was so well known that they weren't even surprised to hear her story. In fact, they told her Andrea had done this exact same thing to at least a dozen other men. She would meet and blackmail men into giving her money, electronics, drugs, etc., threatening to call the cops and report them for rape if they didn't. Her boyfriend, who was a dealer of other drugs than just weed, turned out would often use his drug connections to intimidate and extort the men, and for some reason, he never questioned her stories of being raped, abused, and enslaved by all these different men, because there was no doubt in my mind that he genuinely believed that she was telling the truth. Then when Andrea, who was a crack and heroin addict and prostitute, would get arrested on a possession or a drug distribution charge, would attempt to make deals with the police by offering them information about men who were rapists and pedophiles in exchange for less prison time. She eventually did this so many times that the police stopped believing her. After Mom called the cops, the whole story came undone, and Andrea and her boyfriend thankfully haven't bothered us since. But it's been over a year since the whole thing happened, and I'm still terrified to leave the curtains open at nighttime in case somebody is watching me. I don't think I'll ever be able to feel fully safe in this house, ever again. I grew up in a rag city in Connecticut in poverty, but then again, nearly everyone else was too. Around 13 or 14, my mother, who had a stroke while having an aneurysm, was warned that one blow to the head could be fatal. She used to take me everywhere. We lived off a disability from my father, so she didn't work. Instead, she would take me cigarette butt hunting at night in the downtown business district, which was ripe with half-smoked cigarettes. It's important to note that my mother was a friend without nicotine, and I would do everything to get her some. During the day, we did the soup kitchen tour where we met some nice people who were homeless or poor. It was at a soup kitchen where we met Ray. "Don't worry, he's gay. He's not gonna try nothing," my mother's friend said during our introduction. He was a tall man, probably 6'2" or 6'3", very thin, with skin that hung from his bones as if he had once been a rather large man. He wore small, thicker lens glasses, but spoke with a southern accent and a gentleness. Something about him was alluring, and he seemed rather paternal to me. Ray and my mother Linda hit it off and became friends. We met up at the soup kitchens, and soon the nightly adventures to the ashtrays in the business district stopped, as he would often give my mother some money and smokes. He also fed me chips and fast food, a much appreciated break from the canned corn I would otherwise be eating. Fast forward a little, a couple of months pass, and we begin to trust him. He seemed genuinely excited to see us and was very kind, so much so that my mother did not hesitate to go over his house and take me along. At his house, my mother would take up residence on a love seat, and Ray would sit next to me. He often put his arm around me and pressed me up to him. I loved this because I was young and had a rotten tough time in school and was without friends. My family was broken, so I didn't see my father. The genuine love he had for me makes me cringe now that I'm older and more aware. While walking down the hallway from his apartment, his hand brushed my backside. I matured early and was about as tall as my mom and half a foot smaller than him. The hallway was tight and I thought about it for a second, but dismissed the caress as innocent. I knew I swung my hands like an ape whenever I moved, so I could hardly fault him. Other people we knew saw us with Ray more and more. They became concerned. Grace and Matt had known Ray. They pulled my mother aside and told her that he was insane. They told her that they had gone to buy a trailer, but Ray wanted it as well. They argued for a bit, but the couple didn't budge. That trailer burnt down a couple of days later. Another friend had told my mother that Ray's son was a dentist and was doing well for himself, but had been molested as a kid by Ray. Ray never told us he had a son, not even a hint of it. When my mom told me this, I broke down and cried, but she wanted to keep it hushed. I should point out that my mother was an immoral woman. She had been old enough to know what she was like before she had health issues. She suffered, but my brother said that she was always bad, but afterwards became a monster. She would still see Ray and bring me around him. I broke down in class one day. I looked at my teacher, who really loved me and had been there for me during rough times. She asked if I was okay because she saw my eyes water, but I burst out uncontrollably and sobbed. I could not stop thinking about him touching me and what I had heard. I know it sounds melodramatic, but the uncertainty and the betrayal of my trust wounded me greatly. I don't know if I can give out the school name or not. We'll call it LMM, as that is the school's initials. The teacher told the principal and guidance counselor. The guidance counselor took me into a room and sat me down. He asked me a bunch of questions about Ray that I answered. He kept me alone with him in a room and would not tell me why. I found out later they called my brother's school and my mother at the same time and interviewed them over the phone. My brother had moved into his girlfriend's house, so he hadn't really dealt too much with Ray, but said that he knew him, and my mother ended up telling them everything. The police were called and they drove me to my house as school had ended and they did not want me walking home. They got to my house and told my mother that they would talk to Ray about me. They came back an hour later and told me that he could not speak to me anymore. They couldn't stop him from coming near us, but he was absolutely forbidden to talk to me. It turns out they found him outside the school with money and a new bike. The money was for me because he knew I valued cash to get my mom smokes, and the bike was for my brother. Ray planned to kidnap me that day. I have no doubt about it. A few years more until I turned 16 and moved out of my house, I would run into Ray while walking with Mom. He would always stare at me, but talk to her. My mom would talk back with him, and she never addressed what happened. I moved to Maine at 16 though, away from them both. So to the mother who I suspect was willing to give me up for her addiction, and to the stranger who slithered into my life like a snake, let's not meet again. Okay, so this event only occurred really recently, and I still can't believe it happened. I live in Sydney, Australia, and I'm very used to the occasional insane or creepy person on the street or bus, etc. I know how to deal with them and act around them most of the time. A few weeks ago, I decided to go shopping at a big shopping center known as Westfields in Australia. I'm not sure where they're called elsewhere. They are always busy, and it's hard to find parking, but I managed to get a great spot in the parking lot, on the level where you can enter the center. I shopped and everything was good. I had some lunch, bought some groceries and a new dress. I exited the shopping center and started walking towards my car. There wasn't anybody in the parking lot except for a few cars trying to find a spot. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then I noticed a lady walking in the other lane next to mine. She had tangled, matted and thinning hair. She wasn't dressed in the nicest or newest clothes. She was talking to herself, but I didn't think much of it because people do that when they're trying to remember something or going over something in their head. Then she starts screaming. Nothing in particular, just gibberish. I look over to see what she's doing or if she's injured, but nope, she's fine, just staring directly at me and screaming. She locks eyes with mine as soon as I turn to see what she was yelling about. A few seconds pass and nothing happens. She keeps screaming while keeping direct eye contact with me. Then her mouth spreads into an insanely terrifying grin. She stops screaming and starts bolting towards me. I was frozen for what seemed like an eternity, but it was probably only 3 seconds. I hightailed it to my car, chucked my shopping bag in the seat next to mine, cracked all my eggs, and slammed the door shut just in time. This lady starts banging on my car, screaming while trying to open the doors. I quickly back out of my spot, not caring if I knocked this batshit crazy lunatic to the ground. I didn't. She was fine, physically. But at this point, she climbs onto my fucking trunk and tries to break my back window. I start to move the car, and she jumps off, but chases after me for a few levels, and then I lost her. My heart was beating so fast, I thought I was going into cardiac arrest. I called the police and told them where I saw her and what she did. They didn't find her at the shopping center, and I haven't heard anything else about this. But my boyfriend offered to get me a new carton of eggs. This happened a little over a decade ago, when I was an undergrad. I worked as a pharmacy technician my sophomore through senior years. At a pharmacy, of course, you have regulars. One regular was Joe, a mid-30s man with long straggly hair and an affinity for bizarre outfits. He was very sweet, but also very ill, mentally and physically. He was on a cocktail of antipsychotics, anti-anxiety, anti-depression, etc. Also, he was on medicine for AIDS. Normally, Joe would come in with his mother, who took care of him. However, his mother was older and had her own health problems. Towards the end of my junior year, Joe started coming in by himself, so he would walk from his home or take a taxi. Joe told me frequently that I looked like a young Michelle Pfeiffer, that I should be in LA, yada yada. Aside from the curly blonde hair, I never really saw the resemblance, but okay. I was polite, told him thanks, and asked him how his mother was. Made general small talk while I rang up his scripts. He never gave me the voyeur vibe. My senior year, Joe's mother came in without him and told us that Joe wasn't doing well. He was refusing to take his antipsychotics, and she was getting too old to defend herself if Joe went into a rage. She was having him placed in a home for patients like Joe. I didn't know until that day that Joe was technically under guardianship. The courts and his doctors deemed him too ill to make important financial and medical decisions. Joe's mother gave us the medical release so that Joe's new home could send their staff to pick up his medicine. We didn't see Joe for about 4 months. It was the end of my senior year, a Friday night. Just me and the pharmacist were working because Friday nights are slow. I was reading a magazine when I heard,
"Hey, Michelle."
I'm not Michelle, so I didn't look up. Then angry,
"Michelle!"
and a slap on the counter in front of me made me look up. It was Joe. He was bleeding profusely and left a bloody handprint on the counter. I was shocked, and all I could do was slowly back away to put distance between myself and the very bloody Joe. The pharmacist came rushing over to ask Joe what he was doing here. His home had picked up his meds on Tuesday.
"I wanted to see Michelle. I miss her."
Then he started opening the waist-high door to get behind the pharmacy counter. The pharmacist called the store manager and told the manager to call 911, while she called Joe's mother.
"Michelle, come here. Give me a hug."
No, I don't think that would be appropriate, Joe.
"Give me a hug."
Then he just started screaming this over and over and attempting to climb over the counter. The pharmacist told me to go into the back storage room and lock the door. This just pissed Joe off. He started picking up items, which covered them in blood, and threw them at us. It was a chaotic mess. A patron was about to attempt to subdue Joe, but both the pharmacist and I both shouted not to touch him, due to him being covered in blood and positive for HIV. We told the small crowd that had formed to leave for their safety as Joe was flinging items and getting blood everywhere. Eventually, the police and EMTs arrived. The store manager must have explained the blood and HIV issue because they had on protective gear, long gloves, face masks, etc., and were able to forcibly sedate Joe. The store had to be shut down, and a special cleaning crew had to come in and clean the entire store. Joe's mother came to apologize after the store reopened. She explained that Joe had developed an obsession for me and grew angrier and angrier each month when he was not allowed to tag along to pick up his meds. He attacked one of their home residents the night of the incident, so the home grounded him and sent him to his room. Joe broke his window and crawled out through the broken glass and walked to the pharmacy. The home did not know he had broken out until his mother called frantically. His mother was considering suing the home for negligence, and she had moved Joe to a more secure mental health facility. I grew up in Indiana, and when I was 17 I got my first car and started exploring. I lived somewhere pretty suburban, but if you drove an hour south, you would be in the middle of nowhere. Tons of cornfields and abandoned houses. My friend and I started driving out there a lot, and started going to see these abandoned houses and exploring them. My dad bought a camera for the family a bit earlier, so I would take that and shoot some photos of the houses. We got really good at finding them too. We looked out for all the normal signs, broken mailboxes, long grass, heavy wear on the house, etc. But sometimes we were still worried about whether or not some of the places we went to were completely abandoned. The best houses didn't look as obvious from the outside. Like if a house looks like it's in decent condition, it's more likely to have stuff inside it. If it's super obvious, like all broken windows, missing doors, etc., kids probably already found it and spray painted it and broke shit. We were really respectful about it and wanted to explore places other people didn't, so we looked out for the more subtle places. I remember my friend and I were coming back from a concert in Indianapolis in the summer. We spent the night at my cousin's place in the city. Since the drive back was really long, we left during the day and started taking alternate routes back to try to find any cool places to explore. We were driving down this long dirt road, one of those that doesn't have a name. It's called like Country Road 3282 or whatever. After a while, we see a long dirt driveway coming out from the left, and in the distance we see this really broken house. We pulled into the driveway and drove down. It was probably a quarter-mile long. There was a big no trespassing sign, which really means the place is definitely abandoned. I know it sounds stupid, but it was something that made us way more confident in a house. We park and walk up to it. The door was falling off and the windows were cracked. Inside the house, everything was thrown around, and it had that normal musty abandoned house smell, but it smelt stronger, like more rotten kind of, and just really heavy. I don't know how to describe it. It was really weird. I figured since most of the shit in the house was thrown around and moldy and rotten, it was probably just that. There was this tiny room to the side, but it was completely dark, so we just walked past it. We walked towards the stairs and started stepping over broken glass. Like a lot of it. It's common to see broken glass on the ground, but a huge area was completely covered in it. It made loud cracks as we walked. I started feeling a bit worried. We walked up the stairs, which were also covered in the glass. At the top, there was a long hallway. 2 rooms were on the side, and at the end was a closed door. The 2 rooms were mostly empty. I saw a bunch of garbage in one room, black hoses, mason jars, Coke bottles with tubing. We kept walking and went up to the door and opened it. Suddenly, the smell hit us hard. It was this super strong chemical rotting odor. And then we spotted him. There's a guy in the room. He was really frail, super gaunt. He had baggy clothes on and sores all over his face. He was holding a rifle and staring right at us. I couldn't speak. I see some beakers, bottles, and some tubing on this table that looked like a really shitty science fair project. He lifts up his gun and we sprint out. We get out of the house and started for the car and drove off. We called the police, and it turns out he and his friend were squatting at the place and running a meth lab. The police found one guy upstairs and the other guy in that really dark room downstairs. He heard our car come and was hiding there and watched us. We have no clue why he didn't stop us. He was probably just tweaking out really hard. The broken glass was there to make noise to alert them when someone was inside. I feel so lucky to be alive and safe, because they could have easily killed us, and nobody would know where we were, and they would have been safe. I haven't gone exploring in abandoned houses since that. About 2 years ago, my friends and I had found out about an abandoned insane asylum located in Downey, California. Being the curious 17-year-olds that we were, we decided it would be a good idea to explore this abandoned facility just to see what we could find inside. So on a Saturday night, we gathered a few more of our friends and made the drive out to Downey so we could explore this building ourselves. After about 30 minutes of driving, we arrive in Downey and make our way through the city where the asylum is located. The closer we get, the shadier and shadier the neighborhoods we're passing through become. And after about another 15 minutes of driving, we arrive at our destination. We park the car, climb through the hole in the fence, and make our way into the building to see what we could find. To be honest, it started out not being too bad, considering we are about 10 people, and we're thinking, what's the worst that could happen to a group of 10 people? So, we made our way through the building, looking at all the broken furniture scattered throughout the rooms, the patient files thrown upon the floor, and we're pretty much just having a good time looking around this mental institution. This is where shit gets weird. As we're walking, we of course had a flashlight pointed down the hallway because the power that was once in this building was, and clearly is, out. As we're walking with our flashlight pointed ahead of us, we come to a corner and we see the adjacent wall of the corner light up from what we assumed was another flashlight. And sure enough, we turn the corner and there's a group of 4 kids. Shady, weird fucking kids. We confront each other and they ask us if we had been to the slide. We politely answer no because we have no idea what they're talking about, and they tell us that we should follow them. Of course we decline because we're getting weird vibes from these people and they're just talking amongst themselves. One of the kids comes up to me with, I kid you not, a solid 6-inch long Bowie knife looking thing. Isn't it cool? Look what I found. As he moves the knife closer to my face, I politely answer what a cool find that is, and we start backing away, telling them that we're going to explore the roof of the building. Surprisingly, they say alright and turn the corner and continue on their way. Alright, now that that was out of the way, I'm seriously beginning to feel weird about being in this place, and about how we're definitely not supposed to be here. So at that point, I say fuck it. We need to get to the roof, go down the fire escape, and get the fuck out of here. So we make our way to the roof, and we're sitting there plotting our escape. Like I said, we're not supposed to be in the asylum, so they have a police car stationed at the main gate to make sure no one comes in. So as we're up there, we try to figure out the best path to get out of there without getting noticed by the police. That's when my friend sees a fire escape ladder coming down off this higher portion of the roof. We decide that that was probably our best bet. We grab a small ladder that would be able to boost us up to this higher portion of the roof. My friend Jonah goes up and immediately turns around so he could help the other people by pulling them up. As I'm getting myself up there, my heart completely fucking sinks. Jonah, did you not see this when you got up here? I whispered. What the fuck are you talking about? He responds. I'm looking forward, and he slowly turns to see what is pretty much our worst fucking nightmare. There's about 15 hooded people sitting in a circle surrounding a burning cat or some other dead animal. These motherfuckers were talking in tongues and making noises which seemed satanic. As we're both getting down, we get noticed and they start talking amongst themselves in this weird language. As soon as we get down, these motherfuckers stand up and start sprinting towards us. I tell everyone to ditch the idea of the fire escape and not to worry about the cop. So we started sprinting through this building with this cult in close pursuit behind us. We miraculously make it out of the building and start running across the field to the main gate. And as we're doing so, the cop notices all the commotion, turns on his sirens, and comes driving in. Thank God he manages to cut off the cult from us and starts to chase them as we get away safely. Honestly, I can safely say it was the scariest experience of my life. What would we have done if they had taken one of our friends? Would we have to go back and confront them? I don't know, and I'm glad it didn't happen. During the fall, some of my friends and I grew quite bored of just sitting around in our dorm rooms. Being the only one with a car on campus, I was usually the ones the plans derived from. Not too far from campus was an old abandoned mental hospital that closed down during the 1980s. I've been there before, and it's nothing really special, your occasional slamming door and asbestos-filled rooms. On this particular night, we all decided to head back to the hospital to see if anything was left unexplored. In the car was my friend Michael, Alex, and my sister Haley. We were your typical rule breakers, thinking that crawling under a metal fence labeled no trespassing was badass. When we arrived, we made sure to park far in the back parking lot and check the charge on our phones. As we were driving in, Michael pointed out a building that we had not been in yet. It was blockaded by a 12-foot fence, so that was probably why. For some reason, that night felt like a good night to be a little riskier. Making our way under a foot of gap beneath the fence, we scanned the area for an entrance. Finding one almost immediately, we continued with our adventure. This building was just like the rest. Low-hanging ceilings, damp rotting paperwork all over the ground. The only difference was the way that we entered was through the basement rather than the first floor. 45 minutes had passed and everyone was starting to grow a little more confident, knowing that no danger lurked behind these metal doors. Coming up from the final floor, there was a small hallway with a door which seemed to be slightly cracked open. We made our way to this enormous door and pushed it open, propping it with a chair. Michael was the first to ascend up the stairs, the rest of us following closely behind. There was about 10 stairs, then a platform, a turn, then 10 more. But in the middle of the second set of stairs was a statue. This statue was very out of place and very unsettling to look at. It stood about 4 feet tall and held its hands in a praying manner. It was something that should not be in the attic of an old mental hospital. As we all shuffled by the silent statue, we were careful not to disturb it because there was an undertone of fear within us all. Reaching the top of the stairs was when the thought of leaving was agreed upon, because there before us was 50 to 60 religious statues, all standing about 3 to 4 feet tall, and in the same way, looking directly at us. Michael, being the bravest one of us, was the first to take a step into this uncharted territory. As our iPhone flashlights followed his path, we noticed where he was heading. In the far left corner of the attic was a couch. On this couch was blankets, clothes, and water bottles. Around the couch on the floor were beer bottles and food wrappers, and something that definitely should not have been there: children's clothes. Spotting a newspaper, Michael picked it up and read the date out loud. November 23rd, 2015. Silence was among us. We all made adjustments to face the stairs and headed out of this place, for the date was December 2nd, 2015. Making our way once again past the praying man on the stairs, we headed for the propped open door. As we were about to leave, we were stopped in our tracks. There was a sound coming from above us. At first, I could not make it out, but then I quickly noticed that it was the sound of someone walking. This person did not seem to be walking but stomping with every stride. The sounds grew closer and stopped as soon as it hit the top of the second set of stairs. It almost seemed as though whoever it was contemplating their next move. We did not give them that time and booked it all the way to the basement where we had come in from. From the time that I was in the attic, I did not notice anywhere that could be a place to hide. For the most part, everything was pretty visible and in the open. The creepiest part to me is that we were in that attic for about 10 minutes. Makes you think that maybe the crazies are closer than we think. After my first semester of university, at the beginning of May, I decided to reward myself by getting tickets for a band I wanted to see. They weren't playing in my hometown, unfortunately, and the nearest venue they were playing was in a small town 6 hours away by train. I had a friend who attended university in the town who agreed to let me stay with her, so I figured that it would be fine to go up. I had never been to this town before, but having lived in larger cities my entire life, I often associated small town with safety. I declined my friend's offer to drive me to the concert, considering that she was studying for finals, and I enjoy a good walk. The town was divided by a river, and across that river, you first had to go over one bridge, then walk through a park on an island, and then cross a second bridge to get into town. To get to the first bridge for my friend's university, you had to walk down a nature trail. All this was perfectly lovely, as I did it at sunset. I had just emerged from my first winter in a rather harsher environment than I grew up in, and the whole nature trail park combo was filled with joggers and children playing, and squirrels and everything that I had missed. This is only noteworthy in that I felt completely at ease with my route, but I was pretty distracted and didn't pay a whole lot of attention to exactly which path I had taken. The concert didn't let out till probably slightly past midnight. I got to the first bridge and crossed, and then proceeded across the island to the second bridge. It was a nice night out, and I was actually sort of enjoying myself in the warm spring air. That is, until I got to a hill I didn't remember walking over on the way there. I stopped at the base of it, feeling that something was off, but eventually attributing it to the fact that I had somehow forgotten an entire hill. How funny, I thought as I walked up the mysterious hill. All my thoughts ceased as I got to the top and found myself looking down a path into an empty carnival, and beyond that, the second bridge. A bit of context. I'm a 5'7", 120-pound female, trained as a circus performer pretty much my entire life. This means that whatever extra weight I carry is pretty much all muscle, which serves, if for nothing else, as a boost of confidence. And also, I don't have any sort of fear of carnivals, or clowns or anything like that. But walking over a hill I didn't remember and seeing an entire carnival I didn't remember definitely set me on edge. But I didn't really see any way around it, literally forest on either side. Plus the bridge was right there, and besides, the carnival looked abandoned. So I started off down the other side of the hill into the creepy carnival, maintaining a quick pace, definitely on high alert. I kept my focus mainly on the bridge I was aiming for. I was most of the way through when I saw the people. I saw them from far enough away that I didn't jump, but I did stop dead in my tracks. They seemed pretty normal looking by their clothes, and I was too far away to see their faces. They were sitting in whatever was available, lemonade stands, immobile roller coasters, and picnic tables. I didn't really know what to do about any of it at all, and I'm sure there were much better options available. But in the moment, feeling that I had to do something, I started to walk forward again. And as I did, I made eye contact with the first one of them I saw, and held it as I walked through them. The man I had chosen to look at, I remember very vividly. He looked a lot like I imagined death would look like, a gaunt, drawn-out face with no expression of any type on it, sunken eyes that followed me as the rest of his body stayed perfectly still. From what I could tell, the rest did the same. I was terrified out of my wits, and for some reason, making eye contact with this zombie of a man was the only thing I felt was keeping me safe. I never broke eye contact with him until I reached the second bridge, so far as to opt to walk backwards down the trail. I turned and crossed the bridge at a sprint, and someone shouted from behind me, which only prompted me to run faster. Now I mentioned that the route from the university to the bridge was a nature trail. This meant it had no lights on it and was as black as a void. Trees covering up the moon and making it impossible to see anything. I didn't care. I ran down the trail, tripping over who knows what. Anything to put distance between me and the creepy carnival people. Eventually, I reached a patch of light at the edge of the university and stopped. There wasn't any noise except for crickets and my own frantic breathing. If any had followed me, they had not done so for long. I managed to gather myself enough and remembered that I did in fact have a cell phone, which at that point I used to call my friend to have her meet me at a well-lit spot on campus, populated by studying students. I told her what happened, and her eyes got really wide. As it turned out, unbeknownst to me, there were actually 2 trails through the park on the island. A north one and a south one. I had taken the north one on the way there, and accidentally taken the south one on the way back. She told me that people never ever passed through the carnival at night, as there were local meth addicts that would hang out there. They were unpredictable at best, and at their worst, well, muggings were the least of it. I had gotten off very lucky. So everything ended up being explainable, but somehow that made it even worse. And my friend offered to drive me to the train station across the river the following evening. I accepted. So this incident happened to my mom before she had me over 20 years ago. She worked at a local pub. The pub mainly catered for fishermen, as the town was on the coast of Western Australia. So she knew most of the people who would come in for drinks or food. However, every now and again people from town would come in. She told me that this one guy who came in she knew from house parties around the place, and always wanted to talk to her while she was working, and would say sorry and keep doing her thing. One night she finished work around midnight and walked home, which is only a few kilometers away. She lived with a few housemates, who all were guys. When she got home from her shift, she decided to have a shower. Making her way back to her room, she realized that her door was open, which is normally shut. All the fellas were asleep, so she blew it off as the wind or something. She laid down in bed to go to sleep, but something didn't feel right, and for reasons that she can't explain to me, she felt the need to look under the bed. What she saw under the bed was the guy from the bar. He had followed her all the way home. She tells me that she just stared at him for ages, and he didn't move. He didn't even breathe, to the point where she thought he was dead. She went out of her room calmly and went to one of the guys' room to tell them that she had a dead man under her bed. They all raced in with baseball bats to find the guy halfway out the window. He managed to escape and run away. The police were called, and because they knew who he was, the cops picked him up the next day. The thing that bothers me the most is what his intentions were with my mom that night. That asshole got a fine and was never allowed back in town. Too soft, in my opinion. I'm 22 years old, and this incident happened to me a year and a half ago. I just moved into my first apartment and was still in the process of moving in. The door that leads into my apartment locks itself automatically when closed, so I was going to the entrance of the apartment complex to get my mail while talking on the phone with my boyfriend. I returned to my apartment and sat on the bed while opening the mail and still on the phone. I accidentally dropped the phone on the floor. It landed under the bed, so I had to lie on the floor and stretch out for it. I saw something that caught my eye. There was someone under my bed. My eyes widened and I choked the urge to scream. The person under my bed was lying still with his back towards me and his head in his chest, so I couldn't see his face, and he didn't see me. Trying to be rational while so many thoughts rushed through my head, I picked up the phone and said, "Sorry, I dropped my phone. I'm just gonna take a shower, and I'll call you back." The bathroom is right by my bed, so I hastily walked in and quietly locked the door, turned my shower on, and jumped out my window. My apartment is on the first floor. I called the police and they told me to wait nearby, but to go across the street and see if anyone comes out of the door. This was during the summer, and it was still light out. I placed myself across the street, hiding behind a car while watching my open bathroom window and the entry door. I called my boyfriend, and he came just before the police. I gave them the keys and they went inside. Only moments later, 2 cops came out holding a thin, tired-looking man. His eyes looked absolutely crazy, but he didn't even try to get away. The policeman that stood beside me and comforted me while the other cops searched through my house told me that the man stood outside my bathroom door with one of my kitchen knives waiting for me to come out. This man somehow crept in my entry door while I was getting my mail and hid under my bed. The man that was trying to hurt me turned out to be a homeless person and was placed in a mental hospital. My boyfriend moved in with me the very next day. I went to university in Miami. I studied Management Information Systems in Florida International University. Miami is a pretty chill city, one where I thought that stuff like this could never happen. Anyway, to break right into the story, I used to roommate with 2 other dudes about 3 or 4 miles off campus. They were cool, studious, and pretty much really good people, except for roommate number 2, which I will refer to as Will for the sake of this story. He used to be really irresponsible in locking the front door whenever he left in the morning. We told Will time and time again that he had to lock the door. Out of the 3 of us, Will was always the one that left the latest because his classes started sometime after 11 a.m. My other roommate almost religiously left earlier than 11 a.m. every morning and never came back until 4 or 5 p.m. every single day. Anyway, if I remember correctly, it was a Thursday and I had just gotten home around 5:30 p.m. I was exhausted after taking a very complicated math class. I pulled out my key and tried to open the lock, and the door was already open. I cursed under my breath, but fuck it. I was too tired to deal with this shit right now. I make my way into the house and notice none of my other roommates are home yet. I go into my room, drop my bag in the corner, and just collapse on the bed. Now I have this fear of letting my hand hang off the edge of the bed for fear of a rat nibbling on my fingers or a monster ripping my hand off. Lo and behold, this day I just let my hand rest off the end of the bed. I'm kind of letting it dangle and swing a bit, while thinking if I did good on the test that I had taken previously that day, when all of a sudden I brush what can be described as a closely shaven hairbrush. I think, what the fuck? That's weird. Did I leave some sort of shoes under my bed or something? I poke it again and notice that it's kind of fleshy. I try to pinch it and then it just recoiled back. At this point, I noticed that it was something alive. My heart instantly starts racing and I feel like I want to faint. I think it's a dog or a fucking raccoon that crawled through my window. Long before these thoughts pass my head, out comes this crackhead from under the bed, screaming, "No shoot me, please, no shoot me." I flail my hands in the air and ask him what the fuck he's doing here. He screams at me in Spanish. I don't know what he's saying, but I tell him to get the fuck out before I call the police. This dude just shuffles outside, looking all disheveled and dirty. I close the door behind him and try to gather my breath. After some looking around, I notice that 2 of my watches and my favorite gold rings were gone. I was pretty much pissed and scared for the rest of the day, but mainly grateful that he didn't shoot or stab me. I'm a 25-year-old female. I was 23 at the time that this took place. I had been a college student but had to quit due to major surgery on my leg, so I was unemployed and just spent months sitting around recovering. I was finally off crutches but still limping around. I lived, and still live, in an old Victorian 2-story house that is now a duplex. I live on the ground floor, and a middle-aged reclusive woman occupies the whole second floor. There are separate outside entrances. I lived with a male housemate that was also a friend, who was a few years older than me, and was employed as a security guard at a local casino. Our street is known for being seedy and not a good neighborhood, but I've always felt pretty safe and never had much trouble. One night I was home with my roommate and my boyfriend. We were watching movies in the living room that is in front of the house. My roommate's girlfriend came over with a drunk male friend of ours. The male friend sat down to watch movies with us and immediately passed out, and my roommate and his girlfriend went into his bedroom at the back of the house and immediately started having the most insanely loud sex I've ever heard. She always sounded like the trashiest porn star or hooker, and the screaming could be heard from the street outside. A few minutes into their session, my boyfriend and I were still watching movies and heard a loud sound coming from the back of the house. We couldn't distinguish what it was, maybe something getting knocked over, but we figured it was just my roommate and his girlfriend being extremely loud and all over the place. Eventually they finished and the house was quiet again. Our movie ended and we decided to go to bed in my room. My room is in the middle of the house and shares a wall with my roommate's room, and the living room is on the other side. My bed is against the outside wall of my room, parallel to a window that slides up and down. The side and back of our house is pretty high off the ground. Looking out the window, it's a pretty decent drop. Outside my window are vertical and horizontal beams that extend to hold up a little back porch balcony for the lady upstairs. It really ruins the view having beams right there. My boyfriend went into my room and took off all of his clothes and jumped into my bed. I started to take off my clothes, but stopped when I noticed that the screen on my window was missing. I had an indoor cat at the time, so my first thought was, the screen is missing. Strega must have gotten out of the window. Then I noticed that the window was pushed up way more than I thought was possible. I kept thinking of my cat though. I was obsessed with keeping her inside. My first thought was to look under the bed and see if maybe she was under there. It was dark and I saw a black mass and reached out to grab her, thankful that she was still inside. The black mass wasn't her. It was a black hoodie, and someone was in it. I had grabbed someone's arm. For some reason, my first thought at the moment was that a friend was playing a prank on me and was probably somebody I knew, so I kinda laughed and said, "Hey, there's someone under here." Then I lowered my face to meet the face of the person and realized that I have never seen this guy's face before in my life. This was not a friend and not a joke. "Hey, I don't know this guy," I said a little less calmly. My boyfriend was completely naked and told me to grab my gun, as I was closer to the closet than he was. "Stay where you are," he screamed to the mass under the bed. The guy cooperated. I threw my boyfriend a robe and he put it on and jumped out of the bed near the closet where I was. He took the gun and pointed it at the bed and told the guy to come out slowly with his hands up. Since my roommate is a security guard, I ran to wake him up for backup. He rushed into the room and the three of us stood there as a teenage boy wearing a black hoodie came out from under the bed. We were all kind of in shock and started to question the kid, who cooperated with us completely. He was quiet and humble. His eyes shook violently from side to side, as if he was high or something. My roommate shook him down. We emptied his pockets, and he had condoms, lube, porn advertisements from the back of a dirty magazine, the kind where you can call a number and talk to a woman, and some dirty pills that he told us were Vicodin, but they were just actually extra-strength ibuprofen. He also had a pair of my dirty underwear in his pocket, dirty underwear that had my period all over it. That was the most disgusting part. We found an ID on him as well, and a business card for a youth probation officer, so he clearly was a troublemaker. We also found a piece of paper with names and phone numbers that indicated that he lived with his mother in a hotel room in a notorious drug motel that catered to prostitutes and meth. His high school ID was from Hoopa High, and he was clearly from the local Hoopa Native American tribe, or at least part Hoopa Native. When we saw that he had no weapons, we started questioning why he was in my bedroom underneath my bed with all this stuff, and asked him if he realized how serious this was. He quietly replied that he heard sex from the street and thought that he could have some. Basically, he was a horny teenage boy on some sort of drug, riding his bike around at night, and my roommate's trashy girlfriend's sex noises was like a siren song in the night to this kid. He was so overcome by his own horniness that he scaled a scaffolding and beams near my open window and crawled in and under my bed and probably masturbated to what he was hearing in the next room. He probably jizzed on my underwear. He kept apologizing and saying that he was sorry and that he knows that what he did was stupid. I was still shocked and disgusted and wondering if he would have raped me had I been alone. But we all felt a little compassion for this fucked up little kid. His fate was basically in our hands. We debated on whether or not to call the police, and finally decided not to. You can debate me on how wrong I am on that later. We basically lectured him and told him how lucky he was that he crawled into my window and not someone else's, because he would have been shot or called the police and had him arrested, and whatever that he was on probation for would have gotten a lot worse. He kept thanking us and was super humble at that point. My roommate then escorted him out of the front door and took his bike that he left out on the lawn and walked him to his shitty motel and watched him go inside. We kept all of his stuff. He didn't have any money, just the trash and IDs and phone numbers. We made sure to tell him that we had his ID, knew where he lived, had his mom's number and his probation officer's number, and that if we ever saw him on the street again, he would regret it. Our drunk friend and my roommate's girlfriend slept through this entire ordeal. We had to tell them the next morning what had happened while they slept. I know that I'm going to get a lot of shit from you guys for not calling the police, so I'm going to try to explain why we didn't. First of all, if I had been alone without my boyfriend there, I would have definitely called the police after defending myself with my gun. That would have been a completely different situation. In this case, I had my boyfriend in the room and my male roommate, so we had the kid outnumbered. Secondly, as soon as I discovered the kid, he cooperated and showed no signs of aggression or intent to harm. He did everything we told him to. Third, upon searching him, even though he had condoms and lube, which is creepy, he had no weapons. This indicated to us that he had no plans to rape or assault. He probably just really wanted the thrill of masturbating under my bed while listening to the sex taking place in the next room. He wasn't a big guy either. He was a little skinny kid that I could have easily overpowered even with my small frame. From the info that we found on this kid, he was a neglected, horny teenage boy living with a druggy mom in a shitty motel. So yeah, we felt a little sorry for him in the end. The fact that he was a Hoopa native also scared us a bit, because people from Hoopa out here are known for violence and gang activity. That made us realize that though we doubted this kid was violent, it's quite possible his family members are, and either he would get the shit beaten out of him by family, or we would after getting him arrested. In the end, I'm still terrified to keep my window open, but I think that we handled it well without getting the police involved. After talking to the kid, I really think that he was thankful for letting him go with just a lecture. Having a gun pointed at him the whole time probably scared him enough to realize that it was a serious offense that he won't be repeating. This encounter takes place several years ago in a remote part of the Australian outback. For a bit of background, I'm a pretty built 6'2" dude and was around 26 years old at the time. Now on to the story. I was on a road trip with a mate traveling around the central Queensland outback in my old, semi-reliable Nissan X-Trail. We're both science and zoology nerds and heard about this amazing dinosaur trail out this way, which is basically a grouping of 3 areas: Winton, Richmond, and Hughenden. These places have had previous dinosaur bone discoveries, fossils, as well as a seriously awesome dinosaur track with preserved footprints. We were staying at a place 3 hours from Winton for a couple of days, and we were pretty keen to check out this trail. So we made the decision to do the 6-hour round trip in a day. We were pretty ambitious and stupid back then. We left at 9 a.m. the next morning, car packed with lunch, several liters of water, and my trusty GPS, and off we went. It was a long drive, and halfway through, my aircon decided to cark it. If any of you have lived in or have visited Australia in the summer, you would know it's brutally hot. So I'm sure you can imagine the 3-hour trip without AC, with the eventuality of the 6-hour round trip, was hell. To make matters worse, my GPS also stopped working, as the map software did not recognize the area that we were in. Luckily, I had an old map in my back seat, but it was pretty tough to revert back to map reading when you're used to a computer screen telling you where to go, especially given we're talking the Australian outback here, complete with dirt tracks for roads and very limited signage. But I digress. Finally, we make it to the trail and kick around there for a couple of hours. Not gonna lie, it was pretty awesome. Then we decided to make the trip back, as it was starting to get later in the afternoon, and we didn't want to be driving back in the dark. As we were about to leave, this gnarly old guy who appeared to be an employee of the trail company, dressed in all khaki camouflage gear, asked us about where we were from and where we were heading. He gave me the stink eye when I was vague with the details. but my friend told him the name of the town where we were staying. He took a real liking to my friend, and he laughed when we told him about our lengthy journey in. Apparently, we had taken the long route, and there was a much quicker way to get back that would shave about an hour off the trip. We jumped at the directions, which we wrote down. Off we went on our merry way, thinking about how lucky we were to have met this old dude who gave us some sweet intel on a shortcut home. But I can't deny, there was definitely a creep vibe coming off him. Based on the directions he gave us, we went winding along several roads in the area I had never been on, and eventually settled straight on this narrow dirt road. We were supposed to reach an intersection after about half an hour, take a right, and continue on that road until we got to a main highway that would take us back. After an hour and a half of driving on this dirt trail, though we still hadn't reached this intersection, I was starting to get freaked out a bit, thinking we'd missed a turn, but my mate was completely chilled out and was sure we would get there eventually. I think he thought I was driving too slowly, but there are kangaroos out there. Man, those things can be seriously dangerous if you hit one. We had been traveling for a while now. It was getting later in the day, and I got to the point where the petrol in the tank was only a quarter full. There were no houses, other roads, or cars in sight, and I was really not comfortable with where this was heading. The middle of nowhere, in a remote area in the wasteland that is the Australian outback. There weren't even any trees, only this dirt road and desolate dry brushland shrubs as far as the eye can see. I stop the car and tell my mate to get the binoculars out of the back and take a look around in case he can see a landmark. Yes, I carried binoculars in my car. I still do. He obliges and can just make out this house-like structure not too far in the distance. So we made the decision to head for that. We figured it could be a house, and maybe the people would be nice enough to give us some petrol to top us up and some better directions out of there. We neared this structure, and it became apparent that it was not a house at all. We pulled up out front and see it's an old caravan that's been burnt to a shell from the inside out. It still had 3 blackened partial walls up though, so we can't see all the way in. And it looks like someone had been there recently because there are animal bones strung up all over the place, and a crow skull at the entrance to the caravan. Some of the animal bones even had grass or horsehair woven into them, and they were arranged like decorations. Then we see this hand-painted sign that's been staked into the ground with the words Moonlight Motel on it. My alarm bells were ringing loud and clear. I nudge my friend to say, "Let's get the fuck out of here." But he's distracted by something in the distance. It's a car coming in the direction that we had just come from. Would have been only 10 minutes behind us the entire time we were driving, but I didn't see it once. It's kicking up a ton of dust, which indicates that it's coming fast towards us. At this point, we both hear this creepy scratching sound coming from the burnt-out caravan, like someone is scratching at the wall from inside. I move a little closer to try and see what it is, and there was a person in there peeking out at us from a hole in the damaged wall. Then this childlike voice, that is obviously a grown man imitating a little girl, giggles and says,
"Are you here to play with me?"
My mate and I both look at each other and book it out of there, back to the X-Trail. Just as I'm about to reverse out, the other car stops just behind my car with the high beams on. I can't see the driver, but they're in my way, so I can't reverse out from where I'm stationed. I have no choice but to drive forward and turn around that way. narrowly missing the staked motel sign. As we were turning to leave, the driver starts blaring on the horn, just hammering on it for no reason at all. I just sped off, back in the direction we came from, and the other car doesn't follow. It's getting to twilight at this stage, and pretty dangerous to be out on these country roads once it's dark because of the kangaroo situation. But we're feeling a bit better as we manage to navigate our way back to where we came from, the Dino Trail, and even start to joke around about what happened. The person in the other car was probably just honking at us to get our attention, to help us with directions, or something. I pulled into the parking lot and go to the front desk area of the company that runs the tours. I explained that we had gotten lost on our way back to the town we were staying at, and the lady there was kind enough to give us just enough petrol for the ride back. I couldn't help myself. I mentioned to her that her workmate was a real jerk for giving us those weird directions. We figured that there was no way we messed up the advice he had given us. She gives me a weird look and asked me to describe the guy. I do, and her face goes funny, and she says, "That man does not work here." I saw him today talking with the tourists, and my boss had to ask him to leave. He kept trying to get the details of where the people were staying, and telling them that he had vacancies at this place and they could stay there, called the Moonlight Motel. So, creepy old dude pretending to give helpful directions to a couple of city folk to trap and potentially murder them in your lovely accommodation. Let's not meet. I grew up in Central Texas. This happened at a large lake in South Texas when I was around 20 years old. My family owns a small fishing cabin on this lake. The cabin was very secluded. Myself and a group of 5 other friends had taken to hanging out at the cabin pretty often. The entire lake was very large, 30 square miles, 20,000 surface acres, but our cabin was on the arm of the lake. The water was about 1,500 feet wide from one side to the other of this arm. We also had a pier that jutted out about 100 feet. One morning, I was up very early by myself. I noticed some movement on the other side of the lake. I had binoculars with me and gave it a look. It was a doe and her fawn foraging, but what was at their feet? They were standing in a patch of mushrooms. A friend had just given me a dose of magic mushrooms a couple of months prior for my birthday. It was an amazing experience. There were cattle that grazed across the lake, so I figured it was a possibility that these may be magic as well. For those of you who don't know, this particular fungi grows on cow poop. So, long story short, I paddled over in a kayak, picked a few of them, went back home, researched them, and when I was more than reasonably sure they were the type I wanted, or at least not poison, I tried them. I know, stupid. Yes, I thoroughly cut, cleaned, washed, and disinfected them first. They were the real deal. Soon enough, we were making regular trips to pick shrooms. Eventually, we had so many, we started selling them to others. Just friends, people that we trusted. Eventually, we were going out there every Friday night and picking, partying for the weekend, and heading home Sunday evening. We were making great money and having a lot of fun doing it. I'm not trying to glamorize such activity, and actually, such a lifestyle ended up having big consequences in the end, a story in itself. But we were young and dumb at the time. As time went by and nothing bad happened, we began to feel safer and safer and took less precautions. I should say that this was several years ago, and very few people had cell phones. Myself nor any of my friends owned one, and even if we had, most likely we would not have gotten reception out there in those days. A guy that we had been selling to wanted a large amount. We're talking a couple of pounds dried. So we got into the kayaks and paddled across one night and started hunting. A little dry, so not nearly as many as we sometimes found, in order to fill our request order. In order to fill our order request, we were going to have to venture into new territory. I'll explain. From our pier where we launched the kayaks from, to the left, our arm of the lake continued down another mile, where it eventually became more of a creek. To the right, it jutted out to a peninsula, about a half-mile long, and then circled back around into a cove where you could no longer see it, and then it opened up to the main lake. The beach was clear for about 200 feet, and then it was very thick woods. We cut across the peninsula to get to the beach that was hidden by it. In all the months we had been hunting, we never seen anyone on land, just the occasional fishing boat heading out or coming in. We had been looking on the hidden beach for about 40 minutes when my eye caught a reflection from my light in the woods to my left. "You see that?" I said to my friend. "Yeah, what is that?" We walked into the woods to find two beat-up and severely dilapidated school buses. They looked as if they had been there since Jesus' day, and the woods had sorta just grown in around them. Someone had made a poor attempt to camouflage them with spray paint. I had caught sight of a piece of the reflective tape, surprisingly still a little reflective. My heart was racing, and I was on high alert, but I was also very curious. We walked over and started to peer in the windows, but we couldn't see much because of all the tree sap obscuring our view. About that time, my heart leapt out of my chest as I heard what sounded like a muffled chainsaw starting up near the second school bus. But soon enough we figured out it was just a small diesel generator inside of a Rubbermaid container, buried in the ground, that had automatically kicked on. Still, that was enough to convince me that this place was occupied, or at least maintained. We composed ourselves, laughed a little, and decided to leave. We got back to the beach, cut across the small peninsula, and headed for the cluster of reeds where we had stashed our boats. "Hey man, where's our boat?" my friend asked. I became panic-stricken. He saw another patch of reeds down the beach and seemed relieved, thinking that maybe that was where we left our boats. But I have a famously impeccable sense of direction, and I knew this was the patch. He seemed to fully believe that we would find our boats at the next patch, and just to humor him, and just in case my spidey sense was off tonight, we headed for the next patch about 150 feet away. No boats. Now my friend was freaking as well. Then we heard a disembodied voice coming from the tree line. "I assume you motherfuckers are here to rob me." We look and see a guy in his mid-40s, 6 foot tall, 180 pounds, dressed in army fatigues, BDUs, holding a machete and a billy club. He was quickly and aggressively walking towards us. He shouted, "I got him over here, Ro." The second guy's name, or nickname, I assume. Soon enough, a second guy appeared. He was about 18 or 19, and about 6 foot tall, 180 pounds as well. He was also in fatigues. He too was holding a machete and had a shoulder holster meant for a large revolver, although there was no gun in it. "What the fuck are y'all up to? You stealing shit from us?" the younger guy questioned while snatching our bags of mushrooms off the ground where we had dropped them in fear. "No, we're looking for food," I replied. "Bullshit. Them are cow shit shrooms. We should call the sheriff, but we don't need no pigs rooting around here," the young one said. "We'll just deal with it on our own." I guess you realized your boats are out to sea by now." They both laughed. They pushed our boats into the lake, and the current had carried them away, so all you could see was a distant white dot. We were both terrified, and they knew it. For the first time, I could smell whiskey on both of their breaths. My friend was getting desperate. "Money. We can give you money. Just let us go and we'll bring you some cash as soon as we get rid of these," he proposed. They laughed again. The older one started talking. "We don't give a shit about money. We take fine care of ourselves. We really don't like you drawing attention to our humble home here," referring to the buses. I think they were squatters, maybe more. "Tell you what, if one of y'all can swim out there and get them boats and bring 'em back, then we'll let y'all be on your way, as long as y'all never come back. If you don't think you can do it, we'll have to decide where to go from there." I asked my friend what he wanted to do. We decided that I would swim for it and bring back both boats, or die trying. That meant my friend would be left alone with the two of them, and we weren't sure if they would hold up their end of the bargain. I started swimming for it. My arms and legs were on fire. My lungs were tensing to provide enough oxygen. Finally, I reached the boat. The paddle was lodged inside, thankfully. I paddled to the other boat and tied it off to tow it. About 10 minutes had passed, and I began to paddle back towards the beach, and I finally reached it. I did reluctantly. I thought they were going to scratch on their end. They told us if they ever caught us there again, it would not work out too well for us. But they let us get into our boats and paddle away. They threw rocks and taunted us while we were in range. I was half expecting them to wait until we get into deep enough water and start shooting with the missing revolver. Luckily, that never happened. We paddled further down, so they couldn't see what cabin we went to. Obviously, we never went back. So, creepy father-son squatter duo, I know this was our fault, and I take full responsibility. But y'all are still creepy as fuck. How about we never meet again? I volunteer with a wildlife conservation group. In a nutshell, we patrol some pretty out-of-the-way areas and sometimes stay the night in the forest. In the fall of 2014, I was showing 2 brand new recruits around this really isolated area. We drove in on an old logging trail, and by the time we got there, it was nearing dark. The actual spot I was showing them was about a 20-minute hike. When we eventually got there, one of them, an 18-year-old female, decided to come with me, and the other, a 19-year-old male, stayed in the truck because he said he wasn't comfortable walking through the woods in the dark. This is volunteer, so whatever. I walked down to a river with one of the recruits, using flashlights. We took a quick look around, and then we got back a little under an hour later. The guy who stayed was looking at us like we were crazy. He began asking where we went, with a terrified look on his face. I pointed in the direction where we went, and he said no, and pointed to the other side of the trail. He told us that we were walking through the woods back there, as he pointed into the woods opposite to us. Because he was a little on edge, and it was getting dark, I assumed that he just saw an animal or something, and after a few awkward moments, we decided to head back out. Not much further down the trail, we came across a fair-sized tree in the road that wasn't there before. He began exclaiming, "I told you so! I fucking told you so!" Beginning to feel a little uneasy, I began to slow down and reach for my door handle to get out and take a look at our obstacle. when through the dim light coming from the taillights of our truck, I could clearly see someone jumping from the bush behind us and sprinting for the truck. I began cursing as I hit the gas and ran our truck over the tree, sending everything in the cab flying everywhere. Both rookies were yelling as I sped down the horribly unkept logging trail. Eventually I slowed down and we drove back to the office in complete silence. By the time we got back, it was around 1:30 a.m. I called one of the group managers and explained what had happened. We decided not to call anyone because nothing extremely illegal happened. Nobody was hurt, and it just wasn't worth wasting our resources to go out there for nothing. I was called the next day and informed that both recruits had quit. To this day, I have no idea what that was about. I chose to believe that it was just some late-night logger who was just as surprised as we were. That's the only explanation that lets me sleep at night. When I was 6 years old, my favorite thing to do was explore the woods by my house. I never went into the thicket alone. My friend Ethan liked to join me, but sometimes it was just me and my neighbor Katrina, who was 7 at the time. To get to the woodsy area, you first had to cross a large fallen tree over a small ravine, something that I would never do now, but at that age, I was fearless. My friends and I spent many days daring each other to cross back and forth over the tree without using our arms for balance. On one dreary summer day, I asked Ethan and Katrina to explore with me, but Ethan wasn't feeling too well, so we decided to stay home. Katrina and I set off to the obscure path that led to the fallen tree and spent a couple of hours in the woods. I remember the smell of the woods and the damp, slippery feel of the leaves beneath our feet. It had rained the night before, and the woods were electric with the sounds of birds chirping and water rushing through the ravine. We were entranced. I guess that's why we didn't hear the man approach us. My first thought was to get the hell out of there. I knew all about stranger danger, and I just had this weird feeling about the middle-aged man. Before I could tell Katrina what I was thinking, the man told us that we looked like great explorers and that he could really use our help. He said his puppy ran off into the woods and she wouldn't be able to take care of herself, so it was really important that we find her soon. I hesitated, but Katrina has always had a weakness for puppies, so she agreed to help him look. We set out to look for the missing puppy, but I just kept getting this weird feeling. Every time we walked towards the direction the man came from, he would tell us that he already looked over there and that we should keep to the other side. By that time, I was done. I was ready to nope the fuck out of there, but Katrina would not budge. I told her that I was leaving, and she told me that she was going to stay. I wanted to beg her to come with me, but I decided to leave without her because I couldn't stand being there any longer. I jogged back through the woods, careful not to slip on any of the damp leaves, but the fallen tree was covered in them, so I had to tiptoe my way across. Halfway across, a chill went through my body, leaving a trail of goosebumps on my skin, and I ran. I ran so fast that I forgot how slippery the log was. So I didn't realize that I was falling into the ravine until I had already hit the rocky bottom. I heard a loud crack and looked down to see that my femur was broken and sticking through my skin. Things got foggy after that, but I guess I screamed loud enough for the closest neighbors to call 911. I'm just happy that I screamed loud enough to save Katrina. The police and EMTs found me lying in the ravine, crying and grasping at my broken leg. The last thing I remember was pointing towards the woods and telling them to look for Katrina. I woke up the next day with my leg hooked up to the ceiling and traction in a world of pain. My mom was holding my hand, and she said that when I was ready, the police would like to talk to me. I asked if I was in trouble, but she said it wasn't anything like that. They just needed to ask me a few questions. A policeman came in and asked if I had seen a man in the woods before I broke my leg. I recounted the events that happened and asked if they had found Katrina. They had. When I left, the man started asking Katrina about her family and if she had any big scary brothers that would come looking for her if she was out too late. Their conversation was cut off by my screams, and Katrina immediately ran towards the sound. Luckily, the man's reflexes weren't as fast, and though he tried, he never caught up with her. She said that when she looked around at the end of the woods, he was running back into them. She thought that maybe he was going to get help. Turns out, there was no lost puppy. The police never found the creepy man, but they did find a bag hidden in the brushes by where we first spotted him. Inside the bag was some rope, duct tape, and a pair of binoculars. Sometimes I have nightmares about what could have happened that day, and even now I get chills when I go into the woods. To give some explanation and background knowledge for this whole encounter, I was around 15 at the time this occurred. I was camping out in the middle of nowhere with my family and part of my extended family, being my aunt, uncle, and cousins. I was the oldest kid in the RV, so you can probably understand how it felt to have no one else do the stupid crap I did back then with. With a good 2-year gap between me and the inferiors, it was almost like nirvana when I got to the campground and met other teenagers. These were all people we knew fairly well from previous camping trips, so it was considered normal to hit it off with them from the start and act like we've known each other forever within the hour. Now, on to the story. My parents trusted me a lot, no lie. I liked my fun, but I also liked getting home in time for dinner equally as much. So when I was gone for most of the day with other people from the camp, they didn't think much of it. The only rule was that I had to be back at the RV in time to eat dinner, and before 8:30 in the evening. So picture this, a group of 6 teens, all 15 to 16, out in the middle of the woods with no adult supervision for the vast majority of the day. Just a recipe for success right there. On this particular day, we found a neat little deer trail that we hadn't seen in the 2 years we had been out there before. On second thought, though, it didn't really seem like a deer trail. It snaked through a really thick part of the underbrush. Maybe a foot of clear ground, clear of any branches going upwards. It's a really hard thing to pick out of the brush, unless you either were really looking or know where it is already. It was promptly explored, marked with a broken branch outside the entrance, and quickly forgotten. Except I remembered this little special tunnel. That night, while we were all eating dinner, one of the adults proposed that we played manhunt out in the woods at night. Not everyone was totally on board with this idea, but in the grand scheme of the plan, they were all squashed down like autumn leaves. Everyone got a flashlight, and everyone was assigned to a team. For those of you who aren't sure what manhunt is, here's an explanation. Everyone that is playing is given a flashlight. Then we're divided up into 2 groups. It's basically like a glorified flashlight tag, but there's a catch. As you catch people, you have to correctly identify who they are. And if you can, they join forces with the hunters. The last man standing gets a candy bar or something, whatever is being offered as a prize. This is how we played it anyways. For the first round, I get lumped in with the runners, those who are getting chased by the hunters. We get a 5-minute head start to run, climb up a tree, whatever the hell we want to do to evade the hunters. Usually, I'm the one up in the tree, but that never really worked out as the winning spot. So, to try to score a win for once, I decide to play the cat and use one surefire method of escape, and the hiding spot was the rude little path through the thicket. It took most of the head start time to find the damn thing because it was so well hidden and out of the way. As I passed a few hiding spots, I heard hushed, smothered whispering between siblings who were questioning my actions, like a bird's wings rustling when it's fluffing itself. It should be noted that I have bat hearing. My ears are possibly my greatest asset in this game. When I'm just reaching the destination, I hear the short blast of an air horn announcing that 5 minutes are up. I swan dove into this little path in the undergrowth, shuffling on my hands and knees until I'm about halfway in, crouching down like some huge malformed quail. The hunters are doing an initial sweep through the trails, looking for obvious hiders and people trying to change spots. When they finally reach me, they reach the dead end and go straight back. I try to readjust myself and crawl further into the tunnel. I honestly don't know how it happened, but I found an even more hidden path behind that one. And accidentally, I dragged my stupid body down the rabbit hole, except instead of ending in a dead end, this one ended in a slight hollow. I don't want to describe exactly what I found there. I'm sorry, I just can't. It was a younger looking woman, naked, covered in lacerations and stab wounds, in the fetal position. Her glassy, glazed eyes seemed to look straight through me. I won't go any further than that. I was too scared to scream. I froze there while dark burgundy stains formed on my jeans. I stood there in a pseudo-catatonic position like a marble carving for what seemed like hours, and then I heard someone else coming along that path. Have you ever been so scared for that one moment, that one insane moment, you truly consider something incredibly stupid as a valuable option to escape? That was one of those moments. I let out a short, trembling whimper and started moving. Whoever was on the path stopped and then eagerly started moving forward again. I could hear the panting, uneven breaths of a man. It was getting closer and closer to me by the second. By some wondrous, beautiful miracle, he missed the path leading to the brushy hollow. I heard him moving down past the entrance, dragging something clunky and awkward behind him. I heard clinking noises and the occasional effort to silence the small, sharp noises. I heard a low curse somewhere towards the end of the tunnel, and I blasted out of the undergrowth like a bullet forcing its way out of a barrel. Cracks, crashes, and obnoxious rustling was all around me as I heard the man sharply intake a breath and begin to move towards me. The hoarse, deep panting was getting closer and closer to me, a testament of how I was too slow at exiting. Somehow I exploded out of the entrance, got onto my wobbly, half-asleep legs, and started booking it down the trail. The unknown pursuer was close behind me for a bit, but it seemed that he was too exhausted to chase me at that same speed for long. I know everyone loves to rip on the fact that people always trip in horror movies, but honestly, tripping is something that I'm amazed I didn't do. With adrenaline coursing through me at the speed of a Usain bolt, trying to make my jello-like, unsteady walking appendages work to move away from whoever was behind me was like trying to run on water. It felt like an eternity, but I finally reached the main entrance running back into the camp. And I sprinted down it screaming bloody murder. Focused faces looked out from the trees, and I think someone called after me. Reaching the camp was easy, but trying to explain why I woke up half the people in the camp and bolted out of the woods at breakneck speed was harder. When I finally choked the words out to explain, I remembered a profound, insidious silence throughout the group of adults waiting at the mouth of the trail. I don't really remember a whole lot from that point on. I know the cops were called, and my mother and aunt ran shrieking and wailing along the trail, trying to get the other kids to come back to safety. When someone's yelling like that, you don't ignore it. They rounded everyone up in 30 seconds flat and barreled back into the camp. The police found a man out in the woods, creeping along the trail, clutching a knife and a black garbage bag with a plethora of sharp instruments, and they also found a saw that was abandoned on the trail with some speckled and smeared dried blood on it. I don't really think that there's any getting over this. I still have nightmares sometimes of the man chasing me, breathing heavily down my neck, trying to catch me, and sometimes he succeeds. This happened circa 1971 or 1972, when my mother was about 14 or 15 years old. The incident occurred in a heavily wooded area near Birmingham, Alabama. My mother is the oldest of 5 children. She has 3 sisters and a brother, who is the baby of the family. One weekend in the cooler months of the fall, my grandfather decided to take the whole family, my grandmother, my mother, and all the aunts and uncles, so 7 people total, into the woods for target practice with a rifle. My mother grew up quite poor, and they didn't always live in the best of neighborhoods, so my grandfather wanted to teach the kids how to defend themselves with the rifle, if need be. Like I said, it was later in the fall, so the trees were bare and there were lots of leaves on the ground. The wooded area is just off a dirt road, so this was a fairly isolated area that they were in. Since it was so far off the beaten path, my grandfather became startled when he heard a roar of a car engine so deep in the woods. My mother remembers the car being a blue Ford Galaxy, so it kind of looks something like this. Despite the fact that my grandfather had a gun, he totally freaked out and told my grandmother and the kids to hide under a pile of leaves in the woods. He hid with them. The man in the driver's seat got out, dragged a woman's body out of the car, and just dumped her there in the woods and drove away. After my grandfather was sure the man was gone, everyone came out of hiding, and the woman sat up and stared at them straight in the face. My grandfather asked the woman if she needed help. She said no and that she would be fine. She didn't seem to be injured and obviously didn't want help. She hadn't put up a fight with the man when he was dragging her out of the car. She must have known him or something. So my grandfather cut the shooting lesson short and decided to rush the kids home to safety. Well, on the trail back to the dirt road where my grandfather had parked their car, they passed the man in the blue Ford Galaxy driving out of the woods. My mom looked over and noticed that he had a huge machete laying across the front seat beside him. My mom looked over and noticed that he had a huge machete laying across the front seat beside him. My grandfather made sure that the man could see that he was carrying a rifle, but everyone was careful not to give away what they had just seen. The man struck up a small talk with my grandfather, asked him how he was doing and what they were doing out in the woods. My grandfather explained that he had just taken his family out for some target practice with the rifle. The man told him to have a nice day and continued driving. The next day, my grandfather went back out to that spot in the woods. There was not a body there. However, he did find the woman's wig, her purse, some Kleenex, and a pair of eyeglasses. He collected the items and took them home. According to my grandfather, that area of the woods was known for having shallow graves and being a dumping site for bodies. My mother became hysterical when he walked in the door carrying that stuff. She started screaming, "He killed that lady! He killed that lady!" My grandfather ended up taking the items to the police station, but my mom doesn't think anything ever came of it. She never heard anything else about it after that. Well, she did hear one other thing about it. Early the next morning, my grandmother called my mom when she arrived at work. Just before the kids left for school, she told them not to take the bus that day and that she would come home and pick them up and drive them to school. When my mom asked why, my grandmother said, "Because that car is waiting for you at the bus stop." It was March during spring break. I was 16 at the time, and me and about 20 other people went out into the woods in Surrey County and got a cabin on this nice little retreat center. We planned on staying there for 4 days. For a bit more detail, the cabin was surrounded on all sides by woods. To the west of the cabin were some hunting trails and a creepy abandoned trailer next to a small clearing with a single pine in the center. To the east was a large field. At the far end of the field, there is a slope leading down to a beach. When going down the slope to the right, there is an acre of higher elevation, and to the right of that was a valley that could be accessed from the beach. Anyway, on the last night, a group of about 8 of us decided that we would go down to the beach and sit around and sing songs while playing guitars. It was about 11 p.m. and everything was going fine, and then 3 of the guys decided that they would head back to the cabin to go get some food. They had been gone for about 10 minutes before one of the guys got a call from his brother. His reaction to the call made it seem like something had happened or someone was hurt. When he got off the phone, he said, "We all have to leave, right fucking now," in a very hushed and panicky voice. We all asked why he told us that, and apparently, while the others were walking back, they found a rabbit at the top of the trail, and its head had been cut clean off. Not ripped off like an animal's doing, but cut like someone had took a knife to the rabbit. So we automatically thought they have to be fucking with us. We all began to walk back, brandishing the guitar and metal pipe as weapons in case they weren't fucking with us. About halfway up the hill, we hear rustling and twigs snapping to our right where the valley is. It sounded like someone was walking up the side of a very steep slope. We told them to knock it off, and that if it was a joke, it wasn't funny. The movement to the right stopped very suddenly. We kept going once we neared the top of the hill. I turned on my phone's flashlight, and right on the ground in front of me was a rabbit with its head cut clean off. We took off running and heard something coming out of the woods after us. We didn't stop running until we got to the cabin. When we got there, we found all the guys were sitting inside. We locked every door and all the windows. Me and 2 of the other guys stayed up all night to keep watch to make sure whatever it was didn't follow us back to the cabin. We all fell asleep around 6:30 a.m. When we woke up at 8, someone was flipping their shit about a decapitated rabbit head laying on the front porch by the front door.